Chapter 23, the lymphatic system. So we're getting down to the last couple of organ systems, and lymphatic system might not be a well-known system, but it's certainly important today in today's world. It is your immune system, and so it's really important to talk about and understand the lymphatic system. You have lymph vessels. Those lymph vessels tend to be located where your deep arteries and veins and superficial veins are located. But it's different from the circulatory system in that the circulatory system is a closed system, right? So is a closed system. And the lymphatic system, which is this here. So this is lymphatic, is an open system. It originates in the periphery and then is a one-way system to the heart. So it's a little bit different, and it's an alternate route for fluid that might leave your capillary but not make it back into the capillary. But it's also dominated by lymphocytes, which are white blood cells, and you have lymphatic organs. You have primary and secondary lymphatic organs. And the fluid that is inside the lymphatic vessels is termed lymph fluid. It's basically coming from your blood, minus plasma proteins, because those should only be in the circulatory system. And it's going to have a little different composition. It's not carrying oxygen and carbon dioxide in there. So a couple of things. The lymphatic system is the lymphatic vessels, the lymph fluid, and again, primary and secondary lymphatic organs and tissues, and we'll talk about those. Again, really important to understand, lymphatic vessels originate in the peripheral tissues. And then it's a one-way system of merging lymphatic vessels until it dumps the lymph fluid into the venous system in the subclavian veins. Right? So it dumps, I should say, it dumps into. So it makes that. Let's do this. So lymph fluid is dumping into the subclavian veins. Lymph consists of interstitial fluid. That's what leaves the blood or plasma into the interstitial environment surrounding the cells. There's going to be no plasma proteins. It's dominated by white blood cells, lymphocytes, and other white blood cells that are macrophagic. Now, primary lymphatic tissues are bone marrow and thymus. This is because they mature lymphocytes. And so they're primary source of these lymphocyte white blood cells. Secondary lymphatic tissues or structures, lymph nodes, your spleen, and then tissues dominated by lymphocytes are called tonsils. Mucosal associated lymphatic tissues, these are on your intestines. So you have a number of these. Actually, throughout your digestive tract has a lot of lymphatic tissue. So this is kind of showing you the overview. So primary function of the lymphatic system is to produce, maintain, and distribute lymphocytes, which is really half of the white blood cell immune system. Maintain normal blood volume and composition, the interstitial fluid, right? Because your lymph fluid is originating from the interstitial environment, and so it's helping keep fluid moving back into the circulatory system that might not make it back in the venous end of a capillary bed, and also can help regulate the composition of the interstitial fluid or the fluid surrounding the cells. It's an alternative route for hormones, nutrients, waste products, but really the main role is immune defense, right? Capillaries, lymphatic capillaries are kind of small, medium, and large, very similar to veins. So we'll talk about that. So maintenance of normal, we'll go through these things here. So maintenance of normal blood volume and chemical composition of interstitial fluid. You learn about this more in physio, but you have fluid leaving the arteries, right? And it's going into the interstitial environment. And then some of this fluid is going back into the veins. But a certain amount of fluid doesn't go back, and that fluid then gets put into the lymphatic capillaries that are originating in the peripheral tissue. So these lymphatic capillaries, these originate in tissue beds, or interstitial beds, right? Lymphocytes, primary cells, they are white blood cells. They're about half of the numbers of white blood cells you have. They're responsible for specific immunity. They basically take on bacteria and viruses, or viral infected cells called retroviruses, which can become cancerous cells. Form proteins, toxins released by some bacteria, and they take care of those as well. So again, understand that you have continual movement of blood leaving the circulatory system in the interstitium, but most of it goes back. A very small percentage of fluid that doesn't go back enters the lymphatic capillaries. And so that's where we are here. And eventually it's going to dump them into the subclavian veins right before the venous blood goes back to the right atrium. This is kind of showing you a little bit deeper. So, right, things are leaving and some is going here. Obviously, some is coming back into the venous end, but other lymph fluid is going to then go through the lymphatic system. There are lymphocytes in here, sometimes hormones and nutrients, sometimes waste products. Lymphatics, again, are like veins. They tend to be near where arteries and veins are. And so the lymphatic vessels are thinner walled, larger in diameter, are very permeable because they take up that extra fluid. They have valves like veins, right? Because it's a low pressure system. So there are lymphatic valves. If you have a blocked valve or someone has had lymph nodes removed, we'll talk about those lymph nodes, but lymph nodes basically are little filtration systems that are interspersed through these vessels, mainly where the vessels are merging from coming in from your arms, legs, and head and neck. So you have a lot of lymph nodes. If you take out the lymph nodes, someone has breast cancer or something, and they're checking the nodes to see if the cancerous cells have gone through the lymphatic system. You can check lymph nodes to see if it's traveled. Anything where the valves in lymphatic vessels are damaged or disrupted, like you take out the lymph nodes, the lymph can't go in that one-way system very well, and so fluid accumulates in the interstitium below or downstream from where that problem is, and so you have swelling, right? And we call that swelling due to lymphatic valves or disruption in the lymphatic flow, lymphedema. So, so this goes through. Valves, lymphatic vessels also rely on the skeletal muscles and the skeletal muscles to squish the vessels and the one-way valves, and also the respiratory muscles and abdominal muscles to kind of compress the bigger lymphatic ducts. So you have superficial lymphatics and deep lymphatics, just like veins. And one really interesting point is that all lymphatic ducts or vessels from below diaphragm and all left side of body drain into the left subclavian vein via the thoracic duct. So the thoracic duct is where all the lymphatic vessels are going to drain all the lymph fluid from below the diaphragm and the left side of the body. The only thing, it's just the above diaphragm and right side of body drain to the right subclavian vein via the right lymphatic duct. So it's an instance where usually the body's symmetrical, and this is not symmetrical. Don't know why. So that goes through there. And what it's showing you is, so here's your diaphragm, right? That's a diaphragm. And where all the vessels merge, they all merge right below the diaphragm into this enlarged area called the cisterna chyli. So this right here is the cisterna chyli. And then there's one major tributary that goes up here, and that is the thoracic duct. And so the thoracic duct comes over here, and it joins with the bronchial mediastinal trunk and the left subclavian trunk, right, and the jugular trunk, and it drains right here, and we call that the thoracic duct on the left side. On the right side, it's the right lymphatic duct. The right lymphatic duct, and that is the thoracic duct. So again, showing you thoracic duct here, this where it dumps into the left subclavian vein, and it basically will say drains in the left subclavian vein. So everything inferior to the diaphragm, and then the whole left side. The cisterna chyli, again, is where all of the vessels merge, and then it becomes the thoracic duct that goes up and around, and then goes into the left subclavian vein. Right lymphatic duct is draining right arm, right side of the torso, right side of the neck and head. And the right lymphatic duct is here, right subclavian vein. So you guys can go through that, just the basic anatomy. You need to know where the cisterna chyli is, where the thoracic or left lymphatic duct is, and where the right lymphatic duct is. Lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are white blood cells, and again, they are for specific immunity, and there are 3 types of lymphocytes. So 1 is called T cells, 2 is called B cells, and 3 is called NK cells. And T stands for thymus-dependent cells, B stands for bone marrow derived cells, and NK is natural killer cells. So T cells are really 80% of the lymphocytes that you have. So your thymus is responsible for maturing 80% of the T cells, which is 80% of half your immunity, these white blood cells. And there are different types of T cells. You have cytotoxic T cells that just attack foreign cells or cells infected with viruses. You have memory T cells. They're really activated T cells following the exposure of a particular antigen. So this is where immunization helps, right? So an antigen is on the surface of a membrane, and these memory T cells remember surface antigens of viruses that they have seen in the past. And so these memory T cells will mount an attack before this virus can replicate. And that's how we don't tend to get the same virus twice, right? If the antigen mutates on the virus, then it's an antigen that this memory T cell doesn't know. It's not going to be able to attack as quickly. And then there's helper T cells and suppressor T cells. These kind of activate and help regulate the B cells coming to assist in a fight against some kind of pathogen. So B cells are bone marrow derived cells, and they're 10 to 15% of your lymphocytes. And these are the ones that produce antibodies or immunoglobulins. And they react with the antigens on the cell membrane of the viruses or foreign bodies. So they form an antigen antibody complex. And so these B cells basically come to help fight once the T cells have mounted a response. So T cells are said to be a direct attacker of a pathogen. And then they tell the B cells to come also join the fight. And so B cells are termed an indirect attack cell. NK cells are natural killer cells. They're really looking for retroviruses or cancerous cells, abnormal cells. And so they're the cells that we are working on, not we, because I am not part of it, but there's a lot of research going on with NK cells and helping them discover retroviruses or cancerous cells quicker. And so instead of giving someone chemotherapy, you can do an immune specific response. So these are kind of a hot topic right now. So T cells again, by the way, AIDS or acquired immune deficiency syndrome, right? So this is HIV. This is a virus that kills T cells. And so if this is 80% of your lymphocytes, and that's half your immune system, really, or immune cells in body, and you have a virus that kills these, you don't die from the AIDS virus, you die from everything else that you can't mount an immune response to. And so before we came up with retroviral drugs or drugs that basically attack the AIDS virus to help keep the T cells alive, before that happened, people were dying from pneumonia or other infections that their body could no longer fight off. Now we have medications that can keep the AIDS virus low enough so you have a continual supply of T cells so you can fight off infection. So that's how that works. So go through, read through cytotoxic T cells, helper T cells, suppressor T cells, and memory T cells. And again, B cells, again, these are the antibody antigen complex cells. These are the ones that can also help when you have an immunization, right? Depending on the type of immunization. NK cells, natural killer cells, they're looking for retroviruses or cancerous cells. Lifespan of lymphocytes can really vary, but most lived anywhere from 4 to 20 years. And so that's why some immunizations you can get once in a lifetime, and some you have to get booster shots every 5 to 10 years. It just depends on the lifespan on the particular B cell or T cell that you have immunized to recognize a particular virus or pathogen. The cell-mediated immunity, again, T cells directly attack pathogens, and so it's known as cellular immunity or cell-mediated or direct attack. Antibody-mediated immunity, these are the B cells, and it's also known as indirect or humoral immunity. That's as far as I go in anatomy, but it's good to kind of understand the difference. And this kind of goes through a basic response to bacteria. Bacteria is much easier to deal with than viruses, but it basically goes through this process, right? So you have bacteria present, that bacteria gets phagocytized, and it recognizes the antigen on the membrane of the bacterium. And so the T cells begin to divide, produce cytotoxic T cells, helper T cells, and memory T cells. Now, the cytotoxic cells are trying to kill the bacteria directly. The helper T cells then activate the B cells, and then the B cells will begin producing antibodies against the bacterial antigen on the cell membrane, so it will start attacking the bacterial cell membrane. And so you kind of mount two responses, right? Direct and then an indirect response to the bacteria. Viruses get a little more complicated, and it's above my pay grade, so I'm not going to really get too into that because I would probably get most of it wrong, since it's one of those areas that is pretty complex. Suffice it to say that we get our lymphocytes from lymphopoiesis, which it's really hemipoiesis, but you have a lymphoid stem cell from the hemocytoblast, which is all your blood, your formed element stem cell. And the lymphoid stem cell either migrates to the thymus to become a T cell, or it stays in the bone marrow to become a B cell or NK cell. Some of those T cells can go back to the red bone marrow. but all T cells originate or mature in the thymus. This is lymphopoiesis, so the production of lymphocytes. So lymphatic tissues, by the way, they are dominated by lymphocytes. So it's just tissue dominated by lymphocytes, and they're just loosely kind of collected in connective tissue. Lymphatic nodules or nodes are more discrete, have boundaries, and so they're encapsulated. So they're a little bit different. So lymph tissues, you have your tonsils, you have your appendix is lymphatic tissue, you have Pryor's patches, these are in the digestive tract, and mucosal associated lymphatic tissue in your digestive tract. Your digestive system was really designed to fight pathogens because, you know, back in the beginning of man, there was not a lot of cooking or no cooking before fire. There weren't refrigerators. So there were a lot of pathogens that they were consuming. And so the lymphatic system had to be robust around the digestive tract because humans were eating all kinds of things that could kill them. And so we have this robust immune system just kind of all along our digestive tract, starting in our mouth and throat with the tonsils, and all of it down our intestines, small intestines, large intestines, including the appendix is off the large intestine, on down. Lymph nodes tend to be distributed in areas where things attach to the thorax. So if you think about this, right, you have your heart and lungs, super important stuff in here. And so most of the time, the lymph nodes are going to be where the arms attach, where the head attaches, and where the legs attach, right? So it kind of is trying to make sure things in the lymph tissue or lymph fluid, sorry, gets filtered out or caught before it gets to the heart in this area here. And so it's a protective mechanism. So we do have a large amount of lymph nodes in the cervical or neck area, in the axillary area of our arm, in the inguinal area where our legs connect to our torso, and in the abdominal area, intestines. Lymph nodes are like little water filtration systems. So you're going to have a bunch of lymph vessels going into one lymph node, and then only one vessel comes out. So if it's going to the towards subclavian vein, right? So they're like little filtration systems. You have lymph fluid filtering through, and it catches debris, pathogens, and kind of cleanses the lymph fluid before it gets back into your venous blood, right? So it's trying to clean things out, pathogens, debris, and so forth before it gets back into the venous blood. That's why you can check the lymph nodes to see what's been traveling in your lymph fluid or circulatory system. You can see if cancerous cells have moved. If you have an upper respiratory infection, right? So you have an infection here, these cervical lymph nodes are going to get enlarged because you have a higher number of pathogen and debris, because you have a higher number of infected lymphocyte cells, right? Or lymphocyte cells that are fighting the infection. And so the lymph nodes swell up just from having more fluid and more cells in that area where you have the infection. So that's why neck lymph nodes tend to get big when there's some kind of a strep throat or something of that nature. If you have mononucleosis, where you have an infection everywhere, all of your lymph nodes are going to be swollen in the inguinal area, in your axillary area, in your cervical area, all over. So the thymus is where T cells mature, right? And the thymus, by the way, this is your thyroid. This is your thymus. So your thymus is right above the heart. So thymus is above the heart. Let's see, thymus. So be careful not to mix up thyroid with thymus. Your thymus is right behind your manubrium of the sternum, and it's right above the heart, and it reaches its greatest size and function by puberty. And then after puberty, it actually diminishes or gets less in size and gets replaced by connective tissue. You're like, why are you telling me that? Well, after puberty, your ability to produce T cells decreases. And it's not really a big deal until you get to your 70s or 80s. But by your 70s or 80s, you have a low T cell maturation rate, right? And that equals lower immune system function. And that's why as people age, they just have less T cells because their thymus is less active and productive. And less T cells, then you have less of an immune response. You become more immunocompromised as you age naturally due to this. The spleen is on the left side, kind of right by the left kidney. And it removes abnormal old blood cells. It can recycle iron and broken down hemoglobin from red blood cells. And it can also initiate an immune response by the B cells and T cells. So the spleen can act as an immune organ. You can live without your spleen, but you are slightly more immunocompromised. Also, when you have mononucleosis, it's not uncommon the spleen can get enlarged again because it's mounting a response against the Epstein-Barr virus, which is what causes mononucleosis, and so that's kind of a complication. So again, as people age, T cells not only become less responsive, but you have less T cells. Less B cells are also responsive. They don't rise as quickly when an antigen is exposed on a cell membrane of a pathogen. The size and function of the thymus decreases, which means a decrease in the amount of mature T cells. And so you become immunocompromised or lacking a robust immune system. So that's it for the anatomy of the lymphatic system.